Hi, welcome back to Books on the Go. I am doing a May reading wrap up, and there are not many books to wrap up, and I will tell you why. Because most of the month I have been reading The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan, and it just took me a long time. I did read a couple of other books in between, which I'll come to, but I started reading this, I remember, because I was actually, I went to Hong Kong at the beginning of May, and I remember that I took this on the plane with me. I know it's not a typical plane read, but anyway, and that was a month ago now, and I've just finished it last night. So this has been, and it is quite long and also reasonably dense. So this has been taking up the month of May, and it's part of my reading my TBR project. So it's been sitting on my shelf. It's a few years old now, I think first published in 2015, and Peter Frankopan has written a new one, I think called The New Silk Roads, and he's even got a more recent book which came out this year. So obviously I had to get to this because I'm out of date. Not that these books go anywhere, but events are overtaking some of this history, aren't they? So anyway, I found this really good. So it goes back to the Silk Roads, refers to the trade routes between Asia and down to China and Hong Kong, right through up to Russia and then Western Europe and beyond. And then America comes into it a bit later. But he goes right back to the 1st century AD and possibly even earlier, and back to, we go through the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine era, and really his thesis is that the centre of the world in terms of the area with the most importance has been Asia, and by that he means that area. He's talking about Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, the stands, Turkestan and Kazakhstan and those regions, Iran, which was previously Persia, and he talks about all the different names these regions have had, but it's very clear, and he has maps during the book as well. But I found it really good because it actually, when you think about it, using the Silk Roads as the structure, if you like, of the book is the routes, they're the pathways that have connected these different countries. So, for example, at one time, China was sending silk to Europe, or tea or other goods, and at another time horses were the most traded item, or item might not be the word, and at different times their product has changed, but it's connecting the various countries. And so by using the Silk Roads, he's really giving you a history of these different parts of the world at the times where they were the most important or the most powerful, and also how they've interacted with each other, including conflicts. So you get it gives you a different perspective. Like a lot of books that look at world history or long-term history, it gives you a different perspective than just current affairs, where you can be all consumed in thinking, America's the center of the world, but in fact, when you look over this stretch of time, you realise that they didn't come into it until much later. And you also get a real sense of even England was not at all important. It was considered a backwater until the 17th or 18th century. And then he looks at that imperialism and the empire, the British Empire, and not just the British, but the other European countries, and how poorly they behaved, how they invaded other countries really for their own purposes, and particularly to get assets out of, or goods out of, those countries. And of course we think of now Iran, Iraq and those countries, and the oil that has been so important to sustaining Europe, and their fear of running out of oil, and what that has, that just the hypocrisies and the politics that has led to, that surprised me in the sense that there's a lot of history, I suppose, let's say pre-1960 and even pre-1990 that I hadn't been aware of. So I suppose nowadays what happens, I think I read the news and I get a sense of it, but things that happened back in those years and obviously earlier, I just didn't necessarily know, but it also just puts everything into context. So even World War One, for example, when you get the long lead up to it, you start to realise what all the factors were that led to World War One, and likewise things like 9/11. It gives you a much bigger picture of why that sentiment had been building up, that anti-American sentiment in terms of Al-Qaeda. So I found it really interesting, but as I said, it did take me a long time to read, and that was because I was reading it really, not slowly, but sometimes with non-fiction you skim through, and I chose not to do that with this one because I wanted to try to take it all in. So that was the Silk Roads, and I'm curious to read the new Silk Roads, but I don't know if I'm ready to jump in straight away. But let me know if you've read either one of those or the new one by Peter Frankopan. So that was really May, but also I had a few little breaks from the Silk Roads, and I read this. This was a highlight, Girl in a Pink Dress by Kylie Needham. And you may have seen, I interviewed Kylie and I put the video up on the channel, so check that out if you haven't seen it. But Kylie is an amazing Australian author. She's actually a screenwriter. This is her first novel, and it's not long, but it's a real gem about Frances, who's an artist in her 40s living in Bald Hills in remote New South Wales in Australia, and she makes a good living with her art, but it's a modest sort of career. But she had a relationship years ago with her art teacher Clem, who is a famous artist, and she's been invited to his opening in Sydney, and it brings back memories of their time together and how that came to a quite dramatic end, and how she's ended up where she is and how he's going. But it's very interesting because it's beautifully written, really poetic language, and not a word wasted. Incredible sense of landscape, but it also gives you this real insight into the lives of artists and how they go living together, and a bit of a theme that you might find in other books about the sort of genius artist or the tortured artist and how selfish they can be. But it is a fresh twist on it, I think, because she herself is an artist, and so they butt up against each other because he wants not the limelight necessarily, but it's just all about him and how can they both thrive, and is one of them always going to be in the shadows? And it's been inspired by various relationships. I asked Kylie about that, and she said certainly Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes really interested her as two poets who both had big careers, but how did they go together? And also, I think it gave me Lucian Freud vibes a little bit, and I think it's partly drawn from his relationship with Celia Paul, for example. But once you start thinking about artists, even within Australia, you come up with so many personalities that it could be loosely referencing. So that's part of the fun of reading it, is thinking about similarities. But really recommend this. It's a gorgeous book. It'll be a good book club book. There's a lot to discuss. So that is Girl in a Pink Dress by Kylie Needham. And I also read something different, Deadlines by Mick Herron, and this is part of his Slow Horses series, which is on TV at the moment, which I'm really loving, with Gary Oldman, among others, and Kristen Scott Thomas. And it's Slow Horses, or Slough House is the building or the department that these spies from the MI5 are sent to when they stuff up at work, essentially, or for some reason they're not allowed to continue doing their job, but they can't be fired. So they're sent off to do really boring admin tasks or database things, and it's really a dead end, and it's in this grubby old building, but they're all actually good spies. It was just that something happened. One of them left a file on a train, and another one messed up a security exercise, and each has their own reason why they're there, but that's the sort of premise which I really love. And this is the second one in the series, Deadlines, and the catalyst is that Dickie Bird is murdered. It turns out that he was an old spy who had sort of retired, and it looks as if he was murdered by a Russian agent, and that's what Jackson Lamb suspects, who's the head of Slough House, but he has to go and find out why. Whereas officially it's said that Dickie Bird just had a heart attack, and no one believes that it was deliberate. So there's some Russian espionage and intrigue, but it's really good. He's very witty, so it's got a great sense of humour, great satire, very dry, fun characters, great sort of London setting and England setting. So I really enjoyed that. Would recommend Dead Lions, or if not, just the TV series is also, I think, an excellent adaptation of it. So Mick Herron, I've been meaning to read him for a long time, because I think the people who follow crime writing, the people in the know, have been raving about him for years. So I'm late to the party. Now, Victory City by Salman Rushdie. This is my next read. So we are apprehensive about this one. I tried Midnight's Children with our book club years ago, and famously none of us could finish it. I think one of the members of the book club did finish it, but none of us really got on with that one. And I haven't been back since to Salman Rushdie, but this one we're doing for the Adelaide Writers Week book club, which I'm hosting next week, and so I have to read it. We're not hosting Salman Rushdie, but just the actual book club members. So I think I have to read at least half of it to be a good host. But even the blurb, I'll just read the blurb to you. So, the epic tale of a woman who breathes a fantastical empire into existence. That doesn't win me over, because it sounds made up and it sounds like there's a magical realism, which I'm apprehensive about, and only to be consumed by it over the centuries. And again, I'm nervous, because when it's over centuries, putting aside the Silk Roads, which is non-fiction, then it feels like it's going to be this long epic saga. And again, I find often those sort of books are too remote. I don't feel connected. It doesn't feel close and real when it has too much of a mythical tone. So I'm 2 lines into the blurb and I'm nervous already. From the transcendent imagination of Booker-winning best-selling author Salman Rushdie. So I do believe that he's an amazing author. I just wonder whether his style or whether the genre of his books is just not my thing. So in the wake of an insignificant battle between 2 long-forgotten kingdoms in 14th century southern India, a 9-year-old girl has a divine encounter that will change the course of history. But is it real history or is it made up history? I think it's made up history, so I don't like made up history. After witnessing the death of her mother, Pampa becomes a vessel for the goddess Pavari, who begins to speak out of the girl's mouth. This could really go either way. I could really hate this, or maybe he pulls it off. I don't know. Granting her powers beyond her comprehension, the goddess tells her that she will be instrumental in the rise of a great city called Biznaga, literally Victory City, the wonder of the world. Over the next 250 years, that's a long time, Pampa's life becomes deeply interwoven with Biznaga's, from its sowing out of a bag of magic seeds to its ruination in the most human of ways, the hubris of those in power. I'm just very worried that this is not going to be the one for me. So I'm only on page 1. I'm going to go and read a bit more today or tonight and I'll report back. But let me know if you've read it and what your thoughts were. And as I said, I'll let you know how I go. But that is Victory City coming up next. So they were my books for May. Let me know what you've been reading and I will see you soon. Bye for now.